Hello, everybody, and welcome to another massive manatee math movie where you get to play the role of the therapist and you get to solve all of math's problems. Today, we're going to begin Chapter 2. And Chapter 2 deals all with fractions, multiplying and dividing by fractions. But first, we have to work with some estimation. This is on page 46 in your book. So if you want to turn to page 46 and get your notes out to start taking some notes, now's the time to do that. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so first things first here. We're going to do a quick review on rounding. And you've probably done rounding a lot before. The rule is that if the number falls between 0 and 5, that you round down. But if it falls above 5, or is 5 or above, then you round up. So for example, if we had, let's say, 3, you could either round that up to 10, or you could round that down to 0. In this case, 3 is clearly closer to 0, so you would round it down to 0. On the other hand, if you had a number like 6, you could round that down to 0, or you could round it up to 10. Where do you think you would round it? Well, you'd round it up to 10 because it's only 4 numbers away from 10 and 6 numbers away from 0, so you would round 6 to 10. Now the same thing is going to be true for fractions, right? We're going to have fractions and we're going to have to decide whether or not we're going to round these fractions down to 0, up to 1, or to 1/2. Those are going to be your 3 options: 0, 1/2, and 1. And I'm going to show you how to choose which one you're going to round to. Alright, so here's going to be our first example. And as you can see, we have our fraction 7/8. And we want to round this. We want to round this to either 0, to 1, or to 4/8. And 4/8 is just another way of writing 1/2, because 4 is half of 8. Alright, so what I've done is I've drawn out a number line, as you can see, and I've split it up into 8 different sections. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And why I've split it up into 8 sections is because my denominator in my fraction is 8. So if you want to do a number line, draw a line, and then split it up into however many sections the denominator is. So here we have 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, and then 8/8, or just 1. This is an easy way to plan out your fractions. So then you just look at your numerator and find where 7/8 is. So here's 7/8. Is 7/8 closer to 0, to 1/2, or to 1? Well, it's only 1 spot away from 1, 1, 2, 3 spots away from 1/2, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spots away from 0. So clearly, in this situation, we would round 7/8 up to 1. Okay, well here's another way that I'm going to show you, in case you don't want to take the time to draw the number line. As you can see, we have 7/8 again. And this method you'll be able to do in your head rather quickly with a little bit of practice. So let's first off ask ourselves, let's look at the denominator right here. And we see that the denominator is 8. The first thing that we want to do is we want to know what is half of 8. Well, half of 8, because we're smart and we know what it is 4. Right? And then we're going to look down here and we want to know what is the whole number of 8? Well, the whole number is just the same number, is the same as the denominator, and so that's going to be 8 as well. And then our third option, recall, is 0. So now what we have to do is once we know the half, once we know the whole number, and 0, we look at the numerator, or the 7 in this case. And what we need to do is we need to decide which number 7 is closest to. Is it closest to the 4? Is it closest to the 8? or is it closest to the 0? Well, 7 is 3 away from 4. It's 1 away from 8. And it's 7 away from 0. So the best thing that we could do is round this up to the 8 or make it 1 or 1 whole. So we round 7/8 to 1. Okay, so now we're actually going to do some problems. And in here, they want us to do 3/8 times 11/12. But they don't want us to solve it. They just want us to estimate what the product would be when we actually multiply these. And so I'm not going to draw the number line. I'm going to do that second method that I showed you. And if you want to draw the number line, you can. You would draw one line with 8 parts on it, and you would draw another line with 12 parts in it. And then you would plot those and see which ones they're closer to. I'm going to do it the second way that I showed you instead. And I'm going to think to myself, I'm going to look up here at the numerator of 8, and I'm going to think about what's half of 8. Well, half of 8 is 4, right? And it's not close to 8 at all, so it's not going to be a whole. So is 3 closer to 4, or is it closer to 0? Hopefully you said 4. So this would be 4 over 8, and we're going to round that to 1/2. Okay? Now let's look at the second one, and let's look at 11/12. Now let's look at the bottom number here, and let's think to ourselves, what is half of 12? Half of 12 is 6. So let's look at our numerator. Is 11 closer to 0? Is it closer to 6? Or is it closer to our denominator 12? Well, clearly it's closer to our denominator 12, so we're going to round this one up to 1. Now our problem reads 1/2 times 1. Well, we know that anything times 1 is that same number, so our answer is going to be 1/2. This is a pretty easy lesson. The hardest part is just knowing what to round your fractions to. And if you start practicing how to determine whether to round it to 0, 1/2, or 1, you'll be well on your way. Here's our next example. You'll notice that here we have 5 1/4 times 3 9/10. It's the same thing, except you'll notice that we have a whole number with each of our fractions. So I'm still going to do the same thing. I'm going to look at my denominator. I'm going to look at 4. And I'm going to think, okay, what's half of 4? Half 2, right? So if half of 4 is 2, is 1 closer to 0? Is it closer to 2? Or is it closer to 4? Well, 1 is right smack dab in the middle of 0 or of 2. So you could really go either way. I'm going to just, for sake of the argument, to make it a little bit easier on ourselves, I'm going to round the 1 down to 0. So this fraction is going to go away because 1/4 is going to run down to 0, and I'm just going to be left with 5. Now on the bottom, let's look at this, 3 9/10. So here I have the 10, and remember our method is, let's look at the denominator, and let's think, what's half of this? Well, half of 10 is 5. So now let's look at our numerator, and it's 9. Then let's ask ourselves the question. Is it closer to 0? Is it closer to 5, which is half of our denominator? Or is it closer to 10? Well, 9 is closer to 10. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to round that up to 1, which would be 10 over 10. And I'm going to add that 1 to the 3 and make it 4. Okay? If you didn't catch that, what I did is I round this fraction, 9/10, up to 1. Okay? And then I took this 1 right here that I got from rounding my fraction, and I added it to my whole number that I started with 3, and that's where I got 4. So now what I'm going to do is multiply the two fractions that I've rounded. The 5 from the first fraction. And remember, this went away because I rounded this down to 0. And I'm going to round and I'm going to multiply it by the 4. And when you do that, you get 5 times 4, and your guess, your estimate, is going to be 20. Here's another example that we're going to do together. But this one you'll notice is not multiplication, it's division. Take time and make sure that you're looking at your operation sign so you don't accidentally multiply when you're supposed to divide, right? So we're going to do the same method that we did before. I split up 11 and 5/6 and 2 and 2/3. And don't worry about this up here. That was a mistake. So let's go through and let's ask ourselves our questions that we always ask. First, we want to round this. 11 and 5/6. So let's just look at the fraction right now. Forget about the 11 and just look at 5/6. Let's look at our denominator 6. What's half of 6? Half of 6 is 3. And our numerator is 5. So is 5 closer to 3? Or is it closer to 0? Or is it closer to 6? Hopefully you said that it's closer to 6. And so that means that the 5/6 we're going to round up to 1. And what we do with that 1 is we're going to add that to 11 and we're going to get 12. Now let's look at our 2 and 2/3. Again, let's forget about the whole number. Just block out the 2 for a minute. And let's look at the 2/3. We look at the 3. What's half of 3? Well, it's not an even number, but I do know that it's 1.5, right? So with 3, I look at 1.5. Is 2 closer to 1.5 or is it closer to 3? Well, to make it easy for ourselves, we're going to actually round this up to 3. 2 is actually a little closer to 1/2 of 3 than it is to 3. But we're going to round it to 3 because look what happens. When we round 2/3 to 1, and then we add that to our whole number, which is 2, we get 3. And now all of a sudden, we're doing 12 divided by 3. And 12 divided by 3 is easy to do in our head, and our answer is about 4. Okay, now this is the one that you're going to get to do on your own. This one I want you to try it out. You're going to multiply these two, but you're going to estimate first. And pause the video, work it out in your notebook, and when you're done, unpause it, and we'll work through it together. Okay, let's try this one out. Let's look at 1/4 first. If you looked at 1/4 first, I would look at the 4 and I would say, think to myself, what is half of 4? Half of 4 is 2. So I would look at the 1, and I would say, is this closer to 0, to 2, or to 4? Well, it's in between the 0 and the 2, so you could round it either way. It doesn't matter. Okay? I'm going to round this one to the 2, so to make this 1/2. Now let's look at the 4/5. Well, 4 is really close to 5. It's only one number away, so we're going to round that. We're going to round that to 5/5, or we're going to round it to 1. So what we're dealing with is 1/2 times 1, and we know that to be 1/2. Now you could have also gotten a different answer. You could have also got the answer of 0. If you would have rounded 1/4 to 0 instead of 1/2 and rounded 4/5 to 1, 0 times 1 is 0. So either one of these answers, either 1/2 or 0, are acceptable answers in this particular problem. Alright, here's another one for you to try on your own. Remember, if you round one of the fractions up to 1, you add it onto your whole number. So pause the video here and work it out in your notebook, and unpause it when you're ready to see the answer. Alright, let's see what you did. First of all, let's ignore the whole number for now. Just pretend it doesn't exist and look at the 8. Okay, half of 8 is 4. So we look at the 7. Is 7 closer to 0, to 4, or to 8? 7 is closer to 8, so we're going to round 7/8 to 1. And we're going to add that on to our whole number, which is 2. So 2 plus 1 is 3. And then on our other fraction, 1/3. 1/3 could go either to 1/2 or it could go down to 0. So we're going to round it down to 0, which gets rid of this fraction. And we're going to be left with just 6. So our estimate is 3 times 6, which is 18. Okay? There's a couple of words that you should probably write down that you need to know. Write them in your notebook, add them to your glossary. Underestimate is when you make an estimate like we just did, but it's less than the actual answer. So let's say you estimated and you got 8, but the exact answer was 10. You underestimated. Your estimate was too low. Another thing is to overestimate. If your estimate was greater than the exact answer. So for example, let's pretend that your estimate was 12, but the exact answer was 10. In this situation, your estimate was too much, or it was a greater overestimate. And lastly is compatible numbers, and these are numbers that are easy to perform operations with in your head or mentally. Just as a quick example, an example of that would be a number like 280 divided by 70. And the reason why this is easy to do in your head, even though you might not think it is because you just take off the zeros. 7 and 28. And 28 divided by 7 is, you know it, is 4. And then that's it. You're done. Okay? So that's what we call compatible numbers, is if you can get numbers to fit in nice and easy like that. In this case, you don't put the 0 in your answer in the quotient because the zeros from your problem cancel out. Here in this problem, this will be the last one, I promise. The range of a male Florida panther is about 3 3/4 times the range of a female Florida panther. The range of a male is about 275 square miles. Estimate the range of a female Florida panther. So the key word here is estimate, which means that we can change the numbers around a little bit in order to make our job a little easier. Our numbers that we have are 3 3/4, and also we have 275. So let's look at 3 3/4. What would we round that to? I'm going to look at my denominator, and I'm going to look at, let's see, 4 and half of 4 is 2, but I don't really want to work with any fractions on this particular problem, so I'm going to round 3 up to 4, which makes it a whole. And when I add that whole to the whole number, I get an answer of 4. Okay? Now, the next thing that I need to do is I need to look for a compatible number in 275. And when I do that, I'm going to think to myself, is there a number close to 27 that 4 can go into? It can't go into 25. It doesn't go into 26. It doesn't go into 27. But it does, however, go into 28. So I'm going to round that to 280 because 280 is really close to 275. But my second reason is also that 4 goes into 280 nice and even like. So our last step is to actually divide 280 divided by 4. So I wrote this backwards, so I'm going to rewrite it on a new slide here. We have 280 divided by 4. Now ask yourself, how many times does 4 go into 28? Your answer is 7. But we have to put that 0 on because there's no 0 for it to cancel out. So our answer is about 70. Well, that's about it for this lesson. I know it was long, and I'm sorry about that. First lessons usually are as we cover new content. I hope you understood it. I hope you took notes. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.